Every time an ancient human drank liquid milk from an animal, their body violently rejected it. Yet they kept filling animal stomachs with fresh milk and carrying them across burning hot deserts. That sounds like a recipe for severe food poisoning. But those sour, clumpy lumps resting at the bottom of a leather pouch turned out to be the greatest culinary accident in human history.
How did a deadly digestive nightmare accidentally become the single food that saved early civilization? To understand how this bizarre miracle happened, we have to travel back roughly 10,000 years to the Fertile Crescent. Human beings were just beginning to give up the nomadic lifestyle of hunting and gathering to settle down into early farming communities. They started domesticating wild sheep, goats, and eventually cattle, primarily for their meat, hides, and bones. But then, someone noticed that female animals produced a steady supply of rich liquid every single day without needing to be slaughtered. Imagine living in a world where fresh food rotted in a matter of hours, and suddenly you discover a living creature that produces liquid calories on demand. It seemed like an infinite food cheat code for early humanity. A single goat could provide more continuous energy over its lifetime than its meat ever could in a single meal.
But there was one massive, painful problem that almost destroyed the entire experiment before it even began. Virtually every single adult human on the planet at that time was severely lactose intolerant. When babies are born, their digestive systems produce an enzyme called lactase, which breaks down the complex sugar in milk known as lactose.
But for millions of years of human evolution, that enzyme naturally shut off as soon as a child was weaned onto solid food. If an adult 10,000 years ago drank a cup of fresh animal milk, they experienced brutal stomach cramps, severe nausea, and devastating dehydration. Drinking fresh milk as an adult wasn't a relaxing treat, it was a biological punishment. So why on earth did our ancestors keep milking these animals every morning if it made them miserable? The answer came down to pure, desperate survival during long, harsh winters and unpredictable droughts. When crops failed and game animals became scarce, human beings were forced to look at those animals with desperation in their eyes. They needed those calories, even if consuming them meant enduring hours of physical agony. But they quickly noticed that if fresh milk sat out in the desert heat for even half a day, something strange happened to it. Milk doesn't just sit there quietly when exposed to air and warm temperatures. Wild bacteria naturally present in the environment land in the liquid and begin feast on the milk sugars. These bacteria convert lactose into lactic acid, a process that dramatically changes the chemistry of the liquid. As the acid levels rise, the proteins in the milk begin to untangle and clump together, turning a smooth liquid into a thick, sour, curdled mess. To a modern human, a bowl of warm, sour, curdled milk looks like garbage that needs to be thrown in the trash immediately. But to an ancient human, starving in a dried-up river valley, those weird lumps were a matter of life or death. Someone was brave enough, or hungry enough, to scoop up those thick white clumps and swallow them. And when they did, they discovered something that blew their minds. Eating those strange, sour clumps didn't make their stomachs turn inside out the way fresh milk did. By sheer coincidence, the wild bacteria had already eaten most of the painful milk sugars during the curdling process. The ancient humans had no idea what bacteria or enzymes were, but they instantly understood the result. They had stumbled upon a magical way to transform a liquid that made them sick into a solid food that kept them alive. But curds created by wild air bacteria were still soft, wet, and spoiled within a couple of days. The real transformation happened when someone tried to solve a completely different problem: carrying liquids across long distances. Before humans invented pottery or metal canteens, they made storage containers out of whatever materials nature provided. The most durable, lightweight water bottles available to an ancient nomad were made from the dried internal organs of butchered livestock, particularly the stomachs of young calves, lambs, and kids. These organ pouches were tough, flexible, and naturally waterproof, making them ideal for long journeys across rugged terrain. Picture a nomadic herder pouring fresh milk into a calf stomach pouch, slinging it over the back of a pack animal, and walking for hours under a blazing sun. As the animal trotted along, the milk inside the pouch was constantly sloshed, bumped, and warmed by the heat of the day.
But deep inside the lining of that calf's stomach, a hidden chemical catalyst was waiting to trigger a transformation that changed human history forever. Young mammals produce a specific complex of digestive enzymes in their stomach linings called rennet.
The primary active enzyme in rennet is chymosin, a specialized protein designed by nature for one exact purpose: to curdle milk in an infant animal's stomach so it digests more slowly. When the ancient herder poured fresh milk into an unwashed stomach pouch, the residual rennet in the tissue mixed directly into the warm, sloshing liquid. Combined with the natural heat and constant churning motion of the journey, the rennet went to work with incredible speed. It acted like microscopic scissors, slicing through the protective outer coating of the milk proteins and causing them to instantly snap together into a tight, solid network. By the time the herder stopped to set up camp at sunset and opened the pouch for a drink, the milk was completely gone. Instead of a smooth liquid, out poured a watery, yellowish liquid called whey, leaving behind a dense, firm mass of white curds resting at the bottom of the pouch. The traveler must have thought their precious milk supply was completely ruined. But when they reached in and pulled out a handful of those solid curds, they found something remarkably mild, rich, and surprisingly delicious. Unlike the harsh, super sour curds formed by open-air bacteria, rennet curded cheese was sweet, dense, and packed with concentrated protein and fat. The liquid whey could be consumed as a hydrating drink, while the solid curds could be pressed, salted, and saved for later. Human beings had just accidentally cracked the code of food preservation, turning a highly perishable liquid into a stable, portable food module. But just as early tribes began relying on this new superfood, human biology did something even more shocking. The discovery of cheese didn't just help humans survive, it actually forced the human genome to mutate at a speed rarely seen in evolutionary history. As tribes that practiced cheesemaking and dairying expanded, a random genetic mutation appeared in a small population of humans living in north-central Europe around 7,000 years ago. This mutation kept the lactase enzyme permanently switched on throughout adulthood, a condition known today as lactase persistence. Suddenly, adults who possessed this mutant gene could drink fresh, unfermented milk without getting sick at all. In regions where harsh winters ruined crops, people with this genetic mutation had a massive survival advantage over those who could only digest fermented curds. They had a constant, year-round source of clean liquid, protein, and fat straight from their herds. Within just a few thousand years, this single mutation swept through European populations like wildfire, becoming one of the most powerful examples of gene culture coevolution ever recorded. Human culture invented cheesemaking, and cheesemaking in turn rewired human DNA. But how do we actually know this happened thousands of years ago if soft curds decay into nothingness without leaving a trace? For a long time, historians could only guess how ancient people made their cheese based on ancient folklore and myth. But modern archaeologists recently uncovered microscopic proof hiding inside pieces of broken clay pots buried in the dirt for thousands of years. In regions like modern-day Poland, excavators unearthed unusual ceramic vessels poked full of tiny, deliberate holes, looking remarkably like modern colanders. When scientists analyzed the porous clay of these ancient strainers using advanced chemical testing, they discovered preserved milk fatty acids absorbed deep inside the ceramic matrix. These 8,000-year-old pots were specialized cheese strainers used by Stone Age farmers to separate solid curds from liquid whey. This proved that long before humans learned to write, build stone monuments, or work with metal, they were running complex dairy processing operations. But even with strainers and stomach pouches, early cheese had one major limitation that threatened to limit its usefulness. If curds are left sitting in a warm climate without treatment, ambient molds and destructive bacteria will eventually invade them, turning the cheese into a biohazard within days. Early farmers needed a way to stop bad bacteria in its tracks so they could store food not just for days, but for entire years. The solution turned out to be a simple mineral lying right on the ground around them: common salt. When ancient humans rubbed coarse sea salt or rock salt into fresh curds, it triggered a powerful process called osmosis. The salt drew out the remaining liquid whey from deep inside the curds, lowering the moisture content to a point where harmful bacteria simply couldn't survive. At the same time, salt created an environment where beneficial, acid-producing bacteria could thrive, forming a protective outer rind around the block of cheese. By pressing the salted curds into tight wooden molds and letting them dry out, humans created the world's very first hard cheeses. These dense, salted blocks could withstand heat, rough transport, and months of storage without rotting. Armed with this indestructible source of nutrition, human societies could suddenly support larger populations, build permanent cities, and launch long-distance trade routes across continents. But as cheese spread into major ancient empires, it transformed from a basic survival food into something far more powerful. If you walked through the bustling markets of ancient Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, you would see cheese listed on clay tablet receipts right alongside precious metals, timber, and beer. The Sumerians had dozens of different words for various types of cheese, ranging from fresh goat cheese flavored with dates and aromatic herbs to hard aged wheels used to pay taxes to temple priests. Cheese was no longer just a lucky accident. It was a core driver of the ancient economy. Down in ancient Egypt, pharaohs were so obsessed with cheese that they insisted on taking it with them into the afterlife.
When archaeologists opened the tomb of Ptolemy, the mayor of the ancient city of Memphis, who lived over 3,000 years ago, they found a shattered jar containing a solidified white mass wrapped in canvas fabric. Chemical analysis confirmed it was a canvas-aged cheese made from a blend of cow and goat milk, making it one of the oldest physical specimens of cheese ever discovered.
But while Egyptian royalty treasured cheese as a luxury, another massive empire turned it into a weapon of war. If you ask most people what powered the mighty Roman legions as they conquered the Mediterranean world, they might guess iron swords, heavy shields, or military discipline. But behind every victorious Roman soldier was a daily ration of hard, salty sheep milk cheese known as caseus auteus. Roman generals realized that feeding an army of hundreds of thousands of men on the march was an absolute logistical nightmare. Grain was heavy to transport and required grinding and baking, while fresh meat spoiled almost instantly in the field. Hard cheese, however, was the ultimate military field ration. It was light, dense in calories, packed with muscle-building protein, and virtually indestructible. A Roman legionary could carry a slab of hard cheese in his pack for weeks through rain, mud, and heat, slicing off pieces whenever he needed instant energy. The Romans took cheesemaking so seriously that they turned it into an exact science. Roman villas built specialized cheese kitchens called caseae, complete with dedicated smoking rooms to dry wheels of cheese and complex press systems to squeeze out every drop of moisture. Roman writers like Columella wrote detailed instruction manuals on how to use vegetable enzymes, like milk from fig trees or wild thistle flowers, to curdle milk when calf stomach rennet wasn't available. As Roman armies marched across Europe, they built cheesemaking facilities everywhere they set up permanent camps, teaching local tribes in Gaul, Britannia, and Germania how to make hard-aged cheeses. The famous cheeses we eat today across France, England, and Germany exist largely because Roman soldiers wanted a familiar taste of home on the freezing frontiers of the empire. But just as cheese was cementing its status across the Western world, another vast civilization looked at dairy and rejected it entirely. If you travel across historical East Asia, particularly traditional China, you notice something astounding. Despite having vast agricultural lands, millions of domestic animals, and advanced culinary traditions, cheese was almost entirely absent from the traditional diet. Why did one half of the world become utterly obsessed with cheese, while the other half ignored it for thousands of years? The reason comes down to a fascinating mix of geography, genetics, and alternative technology. Because lactase persistence never became widespread in ancient East Asian populations, drinking liquid milk remained uncomfortable for most adults. But while Europeans relied on animal herds to convert tough grassland into digestible protein via cheese, ancient Chinese farmers focused their energy on intensive crop agriculture, specifically soybeans. The soybean was Asia's answer to the dairy cow.
Chinese cooks discovered that by grinding soybeans with water, boiling the liquid, and adding a natural mineral coagulant called gypsum, they could cause the plant proteins to clump together into white curds. They had invented tofu, a food that mirrored the texture, versatility, and high protein content of cheese without requiring a single drop of animal milk or a single animal stomach. While East Asia built a culinary empire around fermented soy and tea, nomadic tribes on the vast Eurasian steppes were taking cheese technology in a completely different direction. Horse-riding nomads like the Scythians, Mongols, and Kazakhs lived lives entirely centered around their herds, but they didn't just milk sheep and cows, they milked their horses. Mare's milk is naturally much higher in sugars than cow or goat milk, making it ferment with incredible speed. Mongol warriors fermented this sweet milk in leather bags hung from their saddles, using the continuous motion of riding to churn the liquid into a fizzy, alcoholic drink called arag.
They also squeezed the sour curds into tiny, rock-hard balls called kurut, drying them on top of their felt tents under the harsh steppe sun. These dried curd balls were so hard they could last for years without spoiling. When Mongol horsemen were riding on fast military campaigns across thousands of miles, they would drop a handful of dried kurut into a leather canteen filled with water and tie it to their saddle. As the horse galloped, the water dissolved the hard curds into a thick, nourishing soup, allowing the riders to eat a full, energy-rich meal on the move without ever stopping to light a campfire.
Back in Europe, as the Roman Empire collapsed and the Dark Ages set in, the sophisticated science of Roman cheesemaking was almost lost to history. Cities crumbled, trade routes were cut off by bandits, and local knowledge began to fade away. The survival of Europe's rich cheese culture hung in the balance, resting in the hands of a few isolated communities scattered across the continent.
The ultimate saviors of European cheese were medieval monks living in secluded Christian monasteries. Monks living under strict religious rules were often forbidden from eating meat on hundreds of days throughout the year during fasting periods. To keep their bodies healthy through long hours of manual labor and prayer, they turned to dairy as their primary source of protein. European monasteries quickly became the research and development laboratories of the Middle Ages. These monks had three massive advantages over ordinary medieval peasants. They were literate, they kept meticulous written records, and their monasteries stayed in the same location for centuries. If a monk in France discovered that letting a wheel of cheese sit in a damp limestone cave created a delicious creamy texture, he wrote down the exact recipe, temperature, and timing in a parchment ledger so future generations could replicate it. Monasteries across Europe began competing with one another to produce the most distinct, high-quality cheeses to sell to travelers and local villagers. The Benedictine and Cistercian monks experimented endlessly with different types of milk, heating temperatures, washings, and aging environments. Without even knowing what microscopic fungi or bacteria were, these medieval monks systematically bred and domesticated the world's most famous cheese molds. Take the story of blue cheese, for example. Legend has it that a young French shepherd boy was eating a lunch of plain rye bread and fresh sheep milk cheese near the caves of Roquefort. Suddenly, he spotted a beautiful girl in the distance and ran off to chase her, leaving his lunch behind inside the dark, cool cave. Weeks later, the shepherd boy returned to the cave and found his abandoned lunch sitting on a stone ledge. The bread had turned completely moldy, and green veins of fungus had crawled from the rye bread straight into the soft white cheese. Driven by intense hunger, the boy took a bite of the moldy cheese anyway, and discovered an intensely bold, sharp, and salty flavor that was unlike anything he had ever tasted. The cave air was naturally filled with spores of Penicillium roqueforti, a unique strain of mold that thrives in the damp, cool microclimate of those specific limestone caverns. Monks in the region recognized the magic of these caves and began purposefully poking holes with brass needles into fresh wheels of sheep cheese, allowing the cave air to flow deep inside and create the famous blue veins of modern Roquefort. At the exact same time, monks in the humid valleys of northern Italy were developing a massive, rock-hard wheel of cheese designed to last for years, Parmigiano Reggiano.
They used massive copper kettles to cook curds from cow milk, pressing them into gigantic, heavy drums that were bathed in concentrated brine for weeks before being set on wooden shelves to age. These monks created a cheese so dense and low in moisture that it was practically immune to spoilage, developing crunchy little crystals of amino acids that exploded with savory flavor. Parmesan became so valuable in medieval Europe that it was used as currency, accepted by banks as collateral for loans, and targeted by thieves in high-stakes heist operations. I dig into weird historical accidents like this all the time. So if you enjoy discovering how strange human history really is, hit subscribe to catch the next one. As the centuries rolled on, cheesemaking evolved from a monastic secret into a deeply guarded regional tradition, passed down through generations of European families. Every single valley, mountain range, and village developed its own signature style based entirely on its local environment, a concept French winemakers call terroir. In the high alpine meadows of Switzerland, villagers drove their cattle up steep mountain trails every summer to graze on wild mountain flowers and herbs. Because transporting fresh milk down a steep mountain was impossible, alpine herders cooked their milk in gigantic cauldrons over open wood fires right in their mountain huts, creating massive, durable wheels of Gruyere and Emmental. The iconic large holes found inside Swiss cheese weren't made by mice or deliberate carving. They were created by a specific strain of bacteria called Propionibacterium freudenreichi. These bacteria consume the lactic acid inside the aging cheese and belch out tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide gas. Trapped inside the firm outer rind of the heavy wheel, these expanding gas bubbles formed smooth, hollow pockets deep within the cheese. Meanwhile, over in the damp, rainy countryside of England, farmers in the village of Cheddar discovered that if they stacked sheets of warm, drained curds on top of one another and repeatedly flipped them, the heavy weight would squeeze out every single drop of excess whey. This labor-intensive technique, known today as cheddaring, created an ultra-dense, crumbly cheese that could age gracefully for years without going bad. For thousands of years, every single block of cheese produced on planet Earth was a unique, living organism shaped by wild bacteria, local weather, and hand-grafted labor. No two wheels of cheese tasted exactly the same, because every farm had its own unique blend of native microbes living in its soil, barns, and wooden tools. But then came the 19th century, and the Industrial Revolution completely tore up the ancient cheesemaking playbook. In the mid-1800s, a French scientist named Louis Pasteur made a discovery that transformed the entire global food industry. He proved that spoiling foods and infectious diseases were caused by microscopic living organisms, and that heating liquids like milk to a specific temperature could kill off these unwanted bacteria. Pasteurization saved millions of human lives by wiping out dangerous pathogens like tuberculosis and brucellosis that frequently lurked in raw milk supplies. But when industrial dairy factories began pasteurizing all their milk before making cheese, they ran into a massive, unexpected side effect that almost destroyed the soul of traditional cheesemaking. Pasteurization didn't just kill the bad bacteria in the milk. It wiped out all the beneficial, wild microbes that gave traditional cheeses their complex, regional flavors. Milk was rendered completely sterile, neutral, and uniform. To get the milk to curdle and age properly, factory owners had to buy lab-isolated, single-strain bacterial cultures and inject them back into the sterile liquid. At the exact same time, industrial chemists solved another major bottleneck in mass production: the supply of natural calf stomach rennet. As global demand for cheese skyrocketed, there simply weren't enough slaughtered calves available on the planet to supply enough rennet for giant commercial factories. Scientists responded by genetically engineering microorganisms like yeast and fungi, inserting the bovine gene responsible for producing chymosin directly into their DNA. Today, over 80% of all commercial cheese produced in the world is made using this fermentation-produced chymosin, eliminating the need for animal stomach linings entirely. While laboratory rennet and pasteurization allowed cheese to be produced on an unprecedented global scale, industrial food companies weren't satisfied yet. They wanted to create a cheese product that would never spoil, never separate when melted, and remain completely soft and pliable forever. In the early 1900s, a Swiss food chemist named Walter Gerber and an American entrepreneur named James L. Kraft independently discovered that adding emulsifying salts to heated cheese prevented the fats and proteins from separating. By melting down scraps of natural cheese, mixing them with sodium phosphate, water, and milk fat, and cooling the mixture into flat sheets, they invented processed cheese slices.
This new creation had an astonishing shelf life, melted uniformly over hot burgers, and could be shipped thousands of miles without refrigeration. But this industrial creation was so far removed from natural cheese that food safety regulators forced companies to change their packaging labels. In many countries, processed cheese slices cannot legally be called cheese at all. They must be labeled as processed cheese product or prepared cheese food. Humanity had come full circle. We started with an accidental, living lump of curdled stomach milk that saved our species from starvation, and ended with a factory-synthesized, plastic-wrapped square designed for maximum shelf life in a supermarket aisle. Yet, despite the rise of ultra-processed food, traditional raw milk cheesemaking is experiencing a massive global resurgence today.
All around the world, small-scale artisan cheesemakers are returning to ancient methods, rejecting sterile factory practices in favor of traditional wooden tools, natural cave aging, and raw, unpasteurized milk. They are rediscovering the wild, complex flavors that our ancestors first tasted by complete accident thousands of years ago in a desert leather pouch. When you stop and think about it, cheese is one of the most remarkable paradoxes in human civilization. It is a food created by letting fresh milk rot under controlled conditions, discovered by a species that was originally biologically programmed to be poisoned by it. Without that one desperate, hungry nomad who decided to swallow a handful of weird white lumps out of a calf's stomach, the history of human health, agriculture, and global empire might look completely different today. So the next time you melt a slice of cheese on a burger or grab a piece of aged cheddar from the fridge, remember that you aren't just eating food. You are tasting a 10,000-year-old survival trick that reshaped human evolution. If you found out today that your favorite cheese was originally created inside an animal's stomach, would you still eat it? Or does knowing the weird history behind your food change how it tastes to you?